The National Desk, America's News Now.
We're tracking extreme weather as we come on the air, where the country is bracing for intense heat, strong storms, and even tornadoes. Plus,
I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to block him from bringing a prosecution.
the U.S. Attorney General speaking for the first time on claims from a whistleblower in the Hunter Biden investigation. Why he's calling it an attempt to attack the Justice Department. Shifting focus, how the recovery mission is moving forward after the Coast Guard located debris from the Titan submersible near the Titanic. And
we will continue to stand on the side of reproductive freedom.
Both sides announcing new initiatives when it comes to abortion access nearly 1 year after the Roe reversal. How they plan to move forward from here. And ahead of schedule, temporary lanes of I-95 are open for traffic less than 2 weeks after a catastrophic collapse. How crews were able to make it happen so quickly. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. On a Friday, I'm Dee Dee Gatton. We're glad you're with us. And tonight we are tracking extreme weather across the country. Dangerous heat, strong thunderstorms, and even tornadoes are all on the table over the next 24 hours, starting with the heat risk in the Southwest. Right now, 20 million people, as you can see right here behind me, they are on alert for life-threatening temperatures, and these alerts, they're moving west, now covering parts of New Mexico and Arizona, as well as Texas. This heat wave, it is expected to last into tomorrow, and here is what and where we will be watching to see if any of the records fall. San Angelo and Del Rio, they are forecast to see 110 degrees. Loretto and Midland are just behind them at 109, and in McAllen, they're looking at 102. The state is also dealing with the possibility of more severe weather. Today's risk map showing the highest likelihood of tornadoes within that orange patch you see there in the plains, but North Texas also needs to be on alert. We're waiting for the National Weather Service to determine how strong the tornado that hit that area earlier this week was. 4 people were killed in the small town of Matador. Tonight, state teams are on the way to help with the recovery. Developing now, another tropical system has now formed in the Caribbean. Tropical Storm Cindy isn't far behind Brett, but the models show this storm taking a turn towards the U.S. It's still too early to predict any impacts from the storm, but of course, we'll keep you updated as this develops. Just hours ago, the Supreme Court overwhelmingly ruled in favor of the federal government protecting a Biden administration policy. It directs Homeland Security to prioritize its deportation efforts on immigrants who pose a security threat or who recently crossed the border. Texas and Louisiana had sued to block it, saying it conflicted with immigration law. The justices ruled 8-1 in the majority opinion. Justice Brett Kavanaugh calling it an extraordinarily unusual lawsuit. President Biden signed an executive order today aimed at protecting and expanding access to contraception. It marks the anniversary of the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade 1 year ago tomorrow. That decision sparked fears that birth control might also be restricted. The order will increase women's ability to access contraception. It also directs some departments to make sure private health insurance will cover FDA-approved contraceptives. President Biden and Vice President Harris held an event today in D.C. with 3 reproductive rights activist groups. The groups are endorsing Biden and Harris for re-election in 2024. Harris will also give a speech tomorrow in Charlotte, North Carolina, on abortion rights. The Faith and Freedom Coalition's annual conference met today in Washington, D.C. Republican presidential candidates spoke before a group of influential Christian voters. It was the first time the top names in the race appeared on the same stage. Former Vice President Mike Pence told fellow candidates to take a hard line on abortion.
So I want to say from my heart, every Republican candidate for president should support a ban on abortion before 15 weeks as a minimum nationwide standard.
Pence announced his White House bid earlier this month. Developing now, the U.S. military is shifting its efforts after locating the debris of the Titan tourist sub. Analysts will now try to figure out how this catastrophic implosion all happened. Right now, several ships involved in the recovery efforts are returning to the port from the North Atlantic. The Polar Prince, which was used to transport the Titan, will arrive in Canada either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. But the deep sea robots, they will remain on the scene exploring the ocean floor. They will be collecting any clues about what happened. They will also attempt to recover the passengers' remains, but experts say locating them in such an unforgiving environment is highly unlikely. Tonight, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the Navy detected the implosion through its system designed to locate enemy submarines. According to a memo, they began listening as soon as the sub lost communications and picked up the noise roughly 2 hours into the Titan's dive. TikTok is not slowing down, confirming this week that it's testing a new e-commerce initiative. But privacy concerns persist, despite assurances from TikTok CEO that no American data is stored on its servers in China. The company has revealed some is in fact stored in China. This has emphasized calls for Congress to pass an all-out ban of the social media app. National correspondent Janae Bowens breaks down the latest developments.
No, storage has always been in Virginia and Singapore.
New information from TikTok has determined this congressional testimony from TikTok's CEO back in March was not true. Some American information is stored in China.
We've established now time and time again that the Chinese Communist Party can access that data if the data is stored in China.
All of this happening as TikTok's COO announced Thursday they're moving on. In response to a bipartisan probe, TikTok said in a letter, certain creator data is not protected. This means some personal information of American creators who make money from the app is stored in China.
It's clearly a national security threat. Having U.S. data stored in China is unacceptable.
The federal government and 27 states have banned TikTok on government-issued phones, and Montana is the first state to ban the app completely. Calls to follow their lead across the country are strengthening.
We need to do what's best for the American people and what's best for our country as a whole.
In addition to the privacy concerns, lawmakers are also calling for a ban in light of social media's impact on the youngest users. Tom Romanoff with the Bipartisan Policy Center says there's a question of constitutionality.
The First Amendment issue around banning a social media app is one that sets a precedent for other apps to be banned, which is the main concern there.
Ban or not, Jake Denton with the Heritage Foundation says lawmakers can't trust TikTok.
And this is just should serve as the nail in the coffin. If they come to us again and say that, one of these different areas of concern has been resolved, why would we believe them?
Now, Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal and Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn put out a joint statement saying, in part, TikTok executives appear to have repeatedly and intentionally misled Congress. They go on to say TikTok's response makes it crystal clear that Americans' data is still exposed to Beijing's draconian and pervasive spying regimes.
Will TikTok remove what officials say is American data from those Chinese servers?
Well, it doesn't appear that way. TikTok says they are only deleting protected data, which does not include that personal information from paid American creators. The company has also said they will not give any American data to the Chinese government. But as we've heard from lawmakers, there's a lot of doubt around what's actually happening in China. Didi.
Janae, thank you. The NTSB's hearing on the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment continued today in the town. The hearing examining Norfolk Southern's safety systems and the tank cars that carry chemicals. The Federal Railroad Administration leader said the FRA warned Norfolk Southern last fall about following inspection rules, saying there was evidence trains were not being inspected correctly. A union official said the rail car with an overheated bearing that led to the derailment had not been recently inspected. An exec from the Association of American Railroads said they would revise guidelines for defect detectors. Interstate 95 reopened today in Philadelphia, less than 2 weeks since the partial collapse. A temporary 6-lane roadway built over 2,000 tons of recycled glass was finished ahead of schedule after crews worked 24/7 to get it done. President Biden called Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro about the successful reopening.
This was a moment of civic pride for Philly and Pennsylvania. We all came together and we proved that we could do big things again in Pennsylvania.
About 160,000 vehicles drive through that section of the highway every day. According to PennDOT, the permanent reconstruction will take months. Tonight, the Attorney General is pushing back on claims made by a Hunter Biden whistleblower, why he says the Department of Justice had no reason to get involved in the case. Plus, medical gaslighting, why doctors say the phenomenon is forcing thousands of women to live with debilitating pain. And still to come, a recall roundup, the products being pulled from shelves tonight and what you need to know to keep your family safe. Developing now as we come back on air, the Attorney General is pushing back on claims that the Justice Department interfered in the investigation into President Biden's son, Hunter. Less than 24 hours ago, the House Ways and Means Committee released the testimony of an IRS whistleblower. They said the IRS wanted more serious charges and also claimed the AG denied a request to appoint a special counsel. Merrick Garland responding today, saying that's not true. And the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who handled the case had, quote, complete authority.
Mr. Weiss has since sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee confirming that he had that authority. I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to block him from bringing a prosecution, given that he has this authority.
Garland also said he would be open to having David Weiss explain or testify about the whistleblower allegations. Hunter Biden ultimately agreed to plead guilty to 2 tax misdemeanors and struck a deal with the prosecutors to resolve a felony gun charge. It's been a consequential week for the U.S. China relationship. Secretary of State Antony Blinken appeared to make progress with his trip to Beijing. Tensions rose again when days later, President Biden called China's president a dictator. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar takes a look at the evolving tension.
A week of whiplash for relations between 2 of the world's top superpowers. This handshake between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese President Xi Jinping seen as a concrete step toward thawing tensions.
I came to Beijing to strengthen high-level channels of communication.
Then, during a campaign event in California Tuesday, President Biden called Xi a dictator. The Chinese Foreign Ministry hitting back, calling Biden's comment blatant political provocation. The president shaking off concerns it did damage.
I expect to be meeting with President Xi sometime in the future, in the near term, and I don't think it's had any real consequence.
George Washington University professor Robert Sutter says it may help Biden domestically in the face of Republicans who accuse him of being soft on China.
The president just got up and said he's a dictator. Have Republicans called him a dictator? Has Donald Trump called him a dictator? I don't think so.
China also extremely sensitive to the U.S. and G7 allies moving supply chains out of the country, viewing it as a threat to its economic standing. The U.S. insists it's simply minimizing risks, like those demonstrated during the pandemic, not cutting off trade altogether. Just this week, the White House announced a $9.3 billion loan to Ford and a South Korean battery manufacturer to boost domestic electric vehicle production, and released a strategic plan to bring semiconductor production back to the U.S. under the Bipartisan CHIPS Act, legislation designed in part to counter China. The Commerce Department's Adrienne Elrod.
What we are trying to make sure is that We are strengthening our national security by being able to create those really mission critical chips.
The U.S. juggling its own interests with what are often conflicting interests of China, all while trying to salvage a relationship Chinese officials have said is on a downward spiral. In Washington, I'm Atra Al-Nashar reporting.
Atra, thank you. And in what could become another flashpoint, today the Attorney General announced that the U.S. is charging 4 Chinese chemical companies over allegations they knowingly contributed to the manufacturing of deadly fentanyl. He says they provided cartels with the ingredients to make this drug and then distribute them to the U.S. It's a first-of-its-kind indictment. Happening today, all 5 men charged in the death of Tyree Nichols appeared in court. The former Memphis police officers are accused of violently beating Nichols during a traffic stop. They're now facing second-degree murder charges. Today's hearing focused mainly on the evidence and what will be shared with the public before trial. 2 of the men have asked for separate trials, but the judge has not ruled on the request. Another court case playing out in Arizona. A Republican election official is suing former gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake for defamation. Now, the Maricopa County Recorder says he's faced death threats because of Lake's claims that county officials interfered with the election. She reportedly lost several court cases over those claims. And in Mexico, the movie's armorer is now facing a new charge connected to the deadly shooting on the scene of Rust. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is now accused of tampering with evidence. Prosecutors say she passed drugs to another person on set to avoid getting arrested. Her attorneys denied the allegations. And of course, cinematographer Helena Hutchins, as we reported, died in that shooting when she was struck by a live round. The World Health Organization estimates at least 1 in 10 women suffer from endometriosis. It can cause debilitating pain. And Spotlights on America's Angelica Thornton investigates medical gaslighting and how some say it's sidelining the lives of thousands of women here in the U.S.
I started having some pretty bad pains in my lower stomach.
Another day, another pivot for Faye Limbaugh.
I am sitting in the only position that's comfortable.
Faye is sharing her journey on TikTok. She believes she has endometriosis, a disease where tissue similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside the uterus. But more than a decade after the pain started, she still doesn't have a diagnosis.
All I know is that I hurt, and I hurt all the time. I am actually starting to hurt while I'm talking to you.
It takes a huge toll mentally.
Natalie Stack spent years searching for answers.
There was no calculation of when the pain would stop. How long is this pain flare going to last?
She felt isolated, lonely, and hopeless. Then on a trip to Italy with her husband, she met someone from the UK who'd been in her shoes.
She gave me some really targeted advice to stop with the incremental conservative approach of the physicians I was seeing and to go to this Facebook group called Nancy's Nook.
Nobody should have to live like that.
Nurse Nancy Peterson is a pioneer in endometriosis advocacy. Hundreds of thousands of women around the world have used her Facebook group, learning why endometriosis doesn't show up in most ultrasounds, CT scans, and MRIs.
People just don't believe what women are going through.
Every patient I see has been ignored by somebody.
Dr. Nicholas Fogelson is an endometriosis specialist in Portland, Oregon, but he sees patients from around the world who've been misdiagnosed, told their pain is normal, or even worse, doctors blame their symptoms on mental illness. He calls that medical gaslighting.
They are unable to say, I don't know what's wrong with you. I believe you. You clearly your life shouldn't be like this, but I don't know what it is.
I think women's pain has been normalized for way too long.
Dr. Melissa Pendergrass says it takes an average of 6 to 12 years for a diagnosis. By then, the disease has often spread, and patients are suffering 24/7.
Pain with bowel movements, pain with emptying their bladder, having intercourse. So I think the pain is not just take an ibuprofen and suck it up. It's completely life-altering for a lot of women.
Dr. Pendergrass is the one who finally believed Natalie. She immediately ordered a colonoscopy and scheduled her for laparoscopic surgery, the only way to confirm endometriosis and remove it. Natalie had stage 4 deep infiltrating endometriosis. And that colonoscopy that a gastroenterologist told her wasn't needed revealed she also has Crohn's disease.
That was the last time I ever spoke to him.
If your doctor says it's nothing and you still have the symptoms, it's not nothing. You need to find another doctor.
Have you considered at all that you might be faking? What? No.
On TikTok, Faye Limbaugh uses humor to peel back the curtain on endometriosis. In real life, she's still fighting for a referral to a gynecologist.
I had to leave another voicemail this morning, which was unbearably frustrating.
Unable to shake off the pain, unwilling to be ignored.
This is just kind of how it goes sometimes.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Angelica Thornton.
And like we said, the World Health Organization says 1 in 10 women suffer from endometriosis, but there is some encouraging new research out of Japan showing that bacterial infections may be one of the causes. Scientists hope it could provide new direction into how to diagnose and treat the condition. Coming up next here, more than a year after a deadly school shooting in South Texas, officers are receiving new specialized training. Why the superintendent says it's an important part of regaining the public's trust. We're taking the pulse of America, starting in Uvalde, Texas, where school police officers are being trained in mass casualty response.
Shooter, we got a shooter in the building. Threat, shooter.
We watched today as a new set of Uvalde CISD police officers were trained in mass casualty responses. Right now, the department has 8 officers, which they tell us is fully staffed. But if they get more funding, they could add even more. More than a year after the tragedy at Robb Elementary, the Uvalde School District Police Department is trying to start over.
We've been able to get equipment that we've needed, upgrade our weaponry and our inventory.
An important step in regaining the trust of the community. Superintendent Gary Patterson says officers worked on hostage recovery, active threat responses, and potential panic that could ensue after a threat is called in.
Take a drive and take a look. Crumbling roads and bridges abound across the capital region. That's where the New York State Dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund should come in. It's funded by all sorts of taxes and fees. The gas tax you pay every time you fill up your car, vehicle registration fees, car rental taxes, and more. Just one problem. The Dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund is dedicated to just about anything but highways and bridges.
It's outrageous.
State Senator Michelle Hinchy reacting to the newly obtained numbers that show very little of that fund actually goes to highway and bridge repair. Most of it goes into a budget black hole to balance the books at places like New York State DOT and DMV and to pay off borrowing.
I just wanted to get my hands on something instead of staring at a screen for 8 hours.
A search for something different brought Heather Peel from the computer screen to this workshop.
And I made my first cribbage board and custom cribbage pegs just a little over 3 years ago.
Since then, her business Cast and Carve has taken off.
We personalize it with names and we add, animals and wildlife. So there's still that component of graphic design that I do with this, but it's just a little more rewarding to make something for someone that's useful and meaningful and serves a purpose.
And still to come here on the National Desk, a major recall from one of America's most popular car makers. The new issue, Honda, is reporting in over 1 million vehicles and the safety problems it can cause. Soccer fans, FIFA announced today that the U.S. will host the Club World Cup in 2025, the first edition of an expanded soccer tournament with some of the sport's biggest names. It will go from having 8 teams to having 32 teams, including Real Madrid and Manchester City. The tournament will take place in June and July of 2025, a year before the traditional World Cup. If you bought frozen fruit recently, you may want to be careful. A long list of frozen fruit products in over 30 states has been recalled because of possible listeria contamination. They're found at Walmart, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Target, Aldi, and AWG. You can find the list of items on the FDA's website. If you bought any of them, throw them away, you're urged to, or bring them back for a refund. Honda is recalling almost 1.2 million vehicles due to a coaxial cable connector issue. The recall covers certain 2018 to 2023 Odyssey minivans, 2019 to 2022 Pilot SUVs, and 2019 to 2023 Passport SUVs. The rear camera image may not appear on the dashboard screen. Owners will receive letters starting July 24th. That's going to do it for us for now. Join us again tonight for the evening edition of the National Desk. Just check your local listings. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thanks for watching.